Hi, good evening.
Mike and Tim, can I just hear what you're both thinking about the situation at Kherson, where the expectation is now of a very, very important battle? And Tim, tell us first of all, what's the importance of Kherson when it comes to this coming phase of the war?
Well, it's important because it opens up the route to the Crimea. It pushes back against the Russian. They took it very quickly, at the beginning of the year. So psychologically, it's a very important place, and it will give the Ukrainians, in particular, tremendous, tremendous bonus, really, and a feeling that they are continuing to succeed, that the pushback is going well, and so on. My concern is that the Russians are encouraging civilians to leave.
Yeah.
And we've talked before about the use of unconventional weapons, and I'm quite concerned that they will be prepared to use particularly gas in defending Kherson once they've moved all the civilians out. So I don't think they're going to give it up easily. If they were to lose it, it would be a big blow.
Right. So, Mike, what do you make about that? The possible shape of Vladimir Putin's response to the idea of losing Kherson?
It is hard to say what the Russians are going to do, obviously. One thing that consistently we've been surprised about is just how poor they have been throughout the war. I agree with everything that General Tim said about the importance of Kherson. Of course, the other thing about Kherson is it's the only foothold that the Russians have across that river. And what the Ukrainians are trying to do is, before Christmas or before winter, before it gets very cold, is establish a defensive line that they can hold very easily over winter, and the river provides that. I think what is quite interesting is that your listeners will probably remember a couple of months ago, the Ukrainians have been knocking out lots of bridges over the Dnipro around Kherson. And then a couple of weeks ago, they knocked out that big bridge in between Russia and Crimea, the Kerch Bridge. Now, today or yesterday, the Russians put a new pontoon bridge in Kherson, which enables them to evacuate civilians. They can do that anyway because there are some light bridges still standing, but it also enables them to evacuate heavy equipment. So I think it is actually possible that we've seen a new Russian commander come in the last week. He's made an appraisal of the battlefield. He's decided that Kherson can't be held, and they are actually going to right-size their operation, if you like, and pull back across the river, including trying to recover as much heavy equipment as possible.
Yeah. Mike, Vladimir Putin made a big deal about the fact that we're now talking about the annexed areas, as he argues, obviously, as one would expect. He argues that's now Russian territory, and that it would be defended as if it was Russia, as if it was the country of Russia itself, which clearly implies a very, very significant escalation of some kind or another. It's hard to see him backing away from that, Mike, now, isn't it?
Well, it is, but this idea of, I have to, sorry, General Tim, slightly disagree. I mean, the idea of pulling out civilians so that they can fight, to the last soldier in the defense of Kherson. I mean, they haven't bothered about civilians anywhere else. So, I mean, quite the contrary. They've tortured, maimed, raped, and killed their way through the areas that they've controlled. So I don't understand. It seems to me that they're evacuating collaborators, their own administrators out of Kherson. I can't see that they would be doing that in order to protect civilians, because that's contrary to what we've seen everywhere else in there, the
Yeah, but
war.
you wonder, is it a precursor to the use of some weapon, some new level of weapon, maybe a weapon of mass destruction, maybe a nuclear weapon coming into play somewhere? I mean, Tim Cross, the Defence Secretary, the British Defence Secretary, was in Washington just days ago,
Yeah.
said to have been there, so that military leaders could get round the table and talk about the possibility of a Russian nuclear attack. How might that conversation in Washington have gone, do you think, Tim? What would they have been talking about? And what could they be doing or imagining they might be doing?
Well, I think it will have covered quite a lot of ground. I mean, it also looked at this whole issue of these kamikaze drones, how they can give Ukraine more air defense capability, either air to air or ground to air, to do something about that. And I think there will be some impact from that, but relatively small systems, which are quite complicated and have to be maintained. It's not easy to simply bring this stuff in overnight. And whilst I don't disagree with Mike in the context of pulling out all the civilians, I think this new commander is the guy who oversaw and was quite happy to watch as the chemical weapons were used in Syria by Assad. And I think the use of unconventional means is undoubtedly on the agenda. Now, they will have been talking in Washington, Ben Wallace and Lloyd Austin in particular, about, okay, how do we respond to that?
Yeah.
And now I don't think for a minute they're going to respond if there was any tactical nuclear exchange, nuclear weapons. I don't think they would respond for that. And I don't believe, in all honesty, that the Russians are going to use tactical nuclear weapons at this stage. But they will be talking about, okay, how do we respond to the use of unconventional light gas? And that, I think, will have included things like, are we prepared to put NATO air into this theatre? I don't think they will, but I think they will have been discussing it. I think what's also interesting in this is, it's interesting in America in particular, that the polls are showing that people are not as strongly in support of Ukraine as they have been. President Zelensky is very clear he is not prepared to negotiate. He's saying it time after time. And a lot of people in America, both political and ordinary people in the street, if you like, the polls are showing that they're saying this cannot go on this way. We cannot go on pouring billions of dollars in. Zelensky's going to have to negotiate. The thing will have to end up in some sort of negotiation. So I think there'll have been lots of discussion on how can we help bring this thing to an end. Where do we draw the line in terms of the sort of systems that Russia are using? And are we prepared to use any NATO capability in the theatre itself? As I say, I think the latter is still off the table. But the other two, I don't think they'll have reached any, in easy conclusions. And events will inevitably drive the outcomes. But they will undoubtedly have made a clear pitch for putting more equipment into Ukraine and helping to support Zelensky.
Right. And in a moment, I want to come to the question you raised there about support for Ukraine in terms of munitions and the money that's being spent for and behind Ukraine, because that's becoming a more live question. But before I do that, Mike, what do you say to what Tim has said there? The idea, do you conceive it's possible that we could see NATO assets, NATO forces being used in this war if it escalates in the way that we're discussing may be possible?
I think that's highly unlikely. Since the beginning of the war, the NATO leaders have very carefully framed this conflict as a war within the borders of Ukraine. And they have very clearly said that NATO territory will be, that is off the cards. That is a red line. Do not go into that, Russia. And the quid pro quo of that.
What if poison gas was used, or conceivably a nuclear device in some way?
So I think I agree with General Tim that we're very unlikely to see nuclear weapons because that is far too unpredictable, and Putin won't. That's likely to hasten Putin's demise, not slow it down. Gas, I think, is very interesting. I think that's right. I think we might see that being used. Does that? I still don't think that is going to result in NATO assets being brought into theatre. Potentially missile strikes, but I don't think we're going to talk. I don't think we're going to be talking about air power. But it's a very, very dangerous game because we're talking about two nuclear powers here, and they don't want to be tangling with each other.
Yeah, right now, Tim, there is a possibility of support for Ukraine in some way tailing off. I mean, Kevin McCarthy, the Republican Party minority leader in the House of Representatives, he has said if the Republicans win a majority in the House of Representatives in the midterm elections in a couple of weeks' time, they're going to turn the tap off when it comes to resources for Ukraine. That would be a huge development, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. It would. And for all of the talk, it has to be said that other NATO countries have not put as much into this as they have been saying publicly that they would. I mean, we, the UK, have been very much in the lead. The US have of course, put a lot of stuff in. But as I alluded to earlier, and as you've just said, the support is wading away. And, we'll see how the winter goes in terms of energy prices, etc. But I think a lot of people, first of all, reinforcing Mike's point, really, but a lot of people will not even countenance having some sort of a nuclear exchange or NATO engagement in the land arena of Ukraine. Nobody is going to start that over 4 provinces in eastern Ukraine. I mean, it just doesn't bear thinking about. Now, how you put the pressure on to make sure the Russians don't win on this, and we have to make sure the Russians don't succeed, otherwise the implications of that are pretty serious. But I just think there is a lot of people who are beginning to say this has gone on long enough. It's costing huge amounts of money. The Ukrainians are taking serious casualties as well. We have got to bring this to some sort of negotiated settlement. What would that look like? Well, in America, some are suggesting, for example, that a UN-officiated rerun of the referendums in the 4 provinces, an agreement that Russia can have sovereignty over Crimea, and that Ukraine should be neutral in the future. Those sort of conversations are happening.
Yeah, but that was the idea, wasn't it? That was the idea of Elon Musk,
Right.
and we saw it was absolutely dismissed by Ukraine.
Does that not mean, sorry to butt in here, but if we sort of accept Russian sovereignty over Crimea at the same time as you say that Russia must not win here, is that not, they are winning though if they end up, because effectively what we're saying is it's okay to take territory by force and annex it.
I'm not saying that. I'm just telling you what they're talking about in America. Those
yeah.
What
Yeah.
Is
okay. Well, Mike and Tim, I've got to adjourn the conversation there. There's too much to talk about in the time that we got, but we will reconvene again. I promise you that.